Hello and welcome to another edition of Conservative Corner. We're very glad that you've joined with us here. And as you do, and I hope you do, every month, and will continue to do so throughout the year and the many years after that. In the early 1990s, a gentleman from Newton named Steve Ross, an extraordinary gentleman who survived 10 death camps throughout his childhood, his adolescence in Europe during World War II, was the special psychologist for the city of Boston, helping at-risk children get their lives together. And he proceeded in that job for a very long time, or should I say he proliferated in that job. What many people didn't know at the time was that Steve Ross was also a Holocaust survivor, and having survived the aforementioned trauma throughout World War II with the 10 concentration and death camps. One day he went to his primary employer, the then Mayor Ray Flynn, and he went to visit him at City Hall in Boston. And he had the proposal for a Holocaust memorial. And the meeting was supposed to last for 10 minutes. The meeting lasted for an hour. At the end of the meeting, the very Irish Catholic mayor brought Steve to the window overlooking Faneuil Hall. And he said to Steve, he said, "Look down below. This is where your memorial is going to be." And of course, that is the New England Holocaust Memorial at Faneuil Hall, of which Steve Ross is the founder and the creator of that. That was his living legacy. But not just that. His legacy was symbolic with the Holocaust Memorial, which many of you have seen, and if you haven't, you ought to see it. And even if you haven't seen it, I guarantee you probably did. Anyone who has been to downtown Boston has seen it. It's a wonderful tribute, or wonderful memorial, I should say, to the victims of the Holocaust, the 6 million Jews who perished there. So go to see it. See it, especially after you watch the show and what we're going to talk about today. Mr. Ross was also shall we say, he was a philosopher, a psychologist, he was a motivator, but he was also a patriot, a super patriot. In his later life, when he retired from the schools, when he finished raising his 2 children, Julie and Michael, he devoted his life towards telling the story of the Holocaust, what happened to him, and what it meant for the future. But not only that, he became, shall we say, a motivator, a cheerleader for the American nation that adopted him, that saved him from the Holocaust. And I had been with him, fortunately, and I was very glad to have done so in his later years, on many such occasions where he would enthrall audiences of anywhere from 50 to 500 with stories about what he endured in the Holocaust and how he was rescued by American soldiers. And above all, he would tell the story about what it means to be an American and how special this country is. With that being said, I've always wanted to have his children and his grandson with us to talk about, bring people up to date with what is happening today, just in terms of the anti-Semitism that we see. And I'm very proud and glad to have with us here today his daughter, Julie Ross, who's an attorney, and his grandson, Joseph, and who's now in high school. And one of the things that your father, and I will say the wonderful Steve Ross, the great Steve Ross, was talking about at the time was the fact that anti-Semitism led to the destruction of European Jewry and led to his imprisonment and his near death on many occasions. But nevertheless, he was able to prevail from that, to just move on from that. And he's been gone now for 5 years. And obviously, he passed away long before the current wave of anti-Semitism sweeping the world and sweeping America became prevalent. And it's very pertinent that you're here today because just to carry on not only the legacy of what your father endured in the Holocaust, he taught people about the Holocaust, but as it applies to today. Now, when he would speak about anti-Semitism and the Holocaust, there weren't many examples for today. And this is just going back 5 to 10 years. But there are a lot now There's a lot now. And this is what we are seeing today on college campuses around the world, everywhere, even in America. What would your, if somehow we could resurrect your father and he were to see what was happening today, what do you think he would see and feel, Julie?
Well, I want to thank you, Tom, for having us here today. And, it's an honor to be here and a privilege to be here. And thank you for your kind words about my father. I think he would be really disheartened, and I think he would feel one of the great things that happened since the Holocaust was the state of Israel becoming a state, and it's there for us now. And so, as a Jew, we feel more protected and we feel more safe because of the state of Israel. But I know that my father would be very disheartened to see that there is so much hatred going on now, and there's just it's gone to a level that is just scary. It's scary to be Jewish. It's scary to wear the Magan David. It's scary to walk down the street and people know that you're Jewish. You don't know if you're going to get attacked or what's going to happen. You have to think about these things now, where when I grew up, we didn't really think about these things. We lived freely in Newton and grew up, everybody was, not everybody, but so many of my friends and people, neighbors were Jewish, and we just didn't think about these things. Now you have to really think about it. So I know my father would be very disheartened. I think one positive, if you want to try to flip it to the positive, is that because it's happening, it's been cloaked. So there's been this sort of silent anti-Semitism that has been, prevalent and has been sort of existing behind the scenes for years, and it's everywhere. But now it's so much more out in the open, and it's so much more blatant. And so in that respect, there's a positive there in that people are seeing it now. People are seeing what Jews have been dealing with for years, and people are seeing the anti-Semitism, and it's raising awareness of anti-Semitism. And I think that that's important. And I think my father would really agree with me and say, this is in some ways a positive, because we don't want to have anti-Semitism, but it's raising awareness. We're seeing that it's happening, and the rest of the world is seeing that it's happening, and they're seeing what's happening to us, and maybe they can identify some other cultures and peoples that have been historically discriminated against, can identify with the Jewish people, and I think that that's a good thing.
Back in your father's day, when he started speaking about the Holocaust again in the 90s and throughout the 2000s, back then, not too long ago, really the only anti-Semitism that you heard about in America, they were the occasional skinheads, the Nazi rallies, where 12 people would show up somewhere in Michigan, some white supremacist compound in Idaho. That was really it. Now it's permeated, it's really extended into so many different facets of society. And what's frightening is how it has permeated universities, especially the elite universities like the Columbias, the Ivy Leagues, places like that. And a lot, in many ways, it's really not so much the extreme right, which it's there, but it's really a minute movement compared to the radical left, which is really prevailing it, which is really pushing it. And Joseph, you just returned from an event called the March of the Living, and for our viewers, the March of the Living is a program where many Jewish students can go on, and what they do is they bring the students to Auschwitz, and they bring them to Auschwitz to see where the Holocaust happened, in this primary place where about 1 million Jews were killed. And right after that, they bring them to Israel. I wrote about that some years ago for the Israel National News, and it's a very stirring moment for the students who were there. I've never been on it, but Joseph has. Joe, tell us about what you saw and experienced that. Also, especially coming from the perspective where your grandfather was from Poland. He was Polish. He was in Auschwitz. Somehow he survived Auschwitz. And now his grandson, you, have returned to Auschwitz. Tell us what you felt, what you saw, and how it was
Yeah,
when you were
so
there.
being the grandson of a Holocaust survivor, this trip really meant the world to me. To be able to see the place and experience how it felt to be in a place where my grandpa's whole family was killed. It was very difficult, very sad, but also one of the most impactful trips I've ever been on. And being in Majdanek and the woods where we heard terrible stories.
And
of how,
so that was an additional concentration.
we went
Majdanek, where
to
you were.
many different concentration
to
camps
Azovstal.
and other sites where numerous Jews were killed, and it was so impactful for me being there. And you felt a sense of pride also to be able to stand on those exact grounds where countless Jews were killed and be able to be alive and free as a Jew. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but also so impactful. And I felt great pride being there, being able to see that.
You know, I think that especially as we enter the era now where the generation of World War II, they're pretty much dying off. The average World War II soldier, I think, would be 98 today. And the Holocaust survivors, many of whom were children during the Holocaust, they're at least in their 90s. So they're also not going to be with us within a decade. So there are there's quite a few, shall we say, in Newton and Brookline. And there are gatherings for them still. And they have one, I believe, 4 times a year here. And the German government, to its credit, is and has been very supportive of them over the decades, really over the past 70, 75 years, so to speak. But, you know, it's interesting. With the Holocaust survivors, I've met quite a few in my lifetime, and they came from really what I saw, especially as they grew older. They were in 2 different categories. The first category in that they kept everything internalized. They never spoke about it. The second were the ones who spoke about it and needed to speak about it. Now, your grandfather was shall we say, a town crier about it. And I mean that in a positive way. He would speak to any and all audiences to tell about the Holocaust, to tell the story about what happened to him and what happened to the Jews during the Holocaust. And he was able to put it in such a way that they understood it, even if he was able to bring them to that era and to speak about it in the first person. And as I mentioned, I've seen him speak to many such groups, and I was relating to the story with you earlier, and I'll tell the audience. I remember at one such event where he was always at New England, always at Holocaust Memorial Day in April at the memorial in Faneuil Hall. And it's always a big event, and he wore the hat that he wore at Auschwitz and the camps. And then when the event had ended and the audience was dispersing, there was a busload of students, and they were milling about, and they seemed to be from an all-girls school. And I went to the director, and I asked him where he was from, and they said from Pennsylvania, it was some Christian academy. And I said, the founder of this memorial is here, and he would like to speak to the students. So of course he said yes. And so your grandfather spoke to the students, and in an abbreviated lecture, shall we say, brought to life or highlighted exactly what he experienced and what this memorial was all about and what he went through in about 15 minutes. So these teenagers were so enthralled by what they heard from him that they literally didn't want him to leave. They kept following him, and they had tears in their eyes. And I saw that on many such occasions. But again, this was an era when you could speak about the Holocaust in the past tense. You could speak about anti-Semitism in the past tense. And now, fast forward to what has happened today, we're literally in a different world. And that really all changed on October 7th, where in 2023, when suddenly the state of Israel, the Jews, were suddenly viciously assaulted by a massive army of terrorists coming from Gaza, indiscriminately killing civilians, of all ages, from elderly people to babies. And some of the things that they did to the civilians were unspeakable, but would have been sadly familiar to your father, to your grandfather, your father, from World War II. And it was almost a replica of what happened in World War II. You know, the indiscriminate killing of the Jews, literally and I hate to use the term, but the burning of babies in ovens, the massacre of women, the viciousness they assaulted the Jews and murdered them, 1,200 of them, before the Israeli army was able to respond. And it was really an eye-opening for the people of Israel, and I think for the world as well. And I think that also where the Jewish community had its various factions, right, left, conservative, liberal, that those petty differences were thrown apart, or at least with me and from my perspective. And they banded together, because now there's this greater issue of anti-Semitism, which, as a result of that, and Israel's counterattack against Gaza, basically to destroy the neo-Nazi Hamas, and the world many parts of the world just turned against Israel. And we're talking about nation states, South Africa. We're talking about reputable bodies, governing bodies in Europe, celebrities, government officials, call it what you will. And, you know, it's frightening, but it's all too familiar. And your father would have seen this as well. Your father would have seen this and understood it. But rather than my talk about it, I want to hear from you. You're the new generation. You're the new generation, and you're the grandson of one of the greatest advocates for Holocaust education. What do you think going into the future? You're 17 years old. What do you envision?
Well, my grandfather was very captivating, and he could take on any size audience and really motivate them, to show them what a good person is and how the Jewish people aren't evil, as stereotypes portray us at times. But he really inspired others, and as the third generation, I think it's our job to stand up against anti-Semitism, but that's also through demonstrating who we are as a people. We're a very small minority, but also a very strong people. And it's not always been easy to stand up against anti-Semitism. I've faced it numerous times in my life, but I think through showing who I am as a person and really combating that just by being the best that I can be, and showing the morals that are strong within our community, I think that that's the only way to combat such a hatred, is with love. And instead of turning towards like fighting or other bad things, like there's a lot of ways to go about it the wrong way. And the only thing we could do is just stand up and show the world why we're not a bad people.
But you know, now the new anti-Semitism is really hatred of the state of Israel. Mm-hmm. And it used to be just hatred of the Jews. Now it's hatred of the state of Israel. Mm-hmm. And call it what you will, the intifada, the world assault on the Jewish people, and especially emanating from the state of Israel. And you know, now we have a mayoral candidate in New York City who much of his life, his political life, has been devoted to basically adhering to the radical leftist ideology of hating Israel, of supporting the boycott, divestment movement against Israel, and demonizing the Jewish state. And he's running for mayor of New York, and he could actually win. He could actually win. And this in the most Jewish city in the Western Hemisphere. And that's frightening. It will be frightening if he does win. I hope to God he doesn't. And both sides, mostly, but Republicans are certainly against him, and most of the Democrats are too, because they see what a travesty this is. So the point is, and now he's trying to backtrack on his anti-Semitic, anti-Israel positions. But you know, your father this would have been familiar to him, because he saw that he saw that, I'm sure, from Poland in the 30s, where you had politicians just talk about demonizing the Jews, demonizing Israel, or not Israel at the time, but really going against it and using using the Jews then as a scapegoat, to today Israel as a scapegoat. And this is happening in America. Now, obviously, we like to think this is an isolated case, but we don't know. We don't know. What we do know is that we have to be all the more vigilant and all the more proactive to see how this will materialize. What do you think of that, Julie?
I think it's really important to educate people about what, as Joseph said, who we are as a people, but also to educate about what hatred can do. And so the memorial is just one piece of that. And right now there is being built a museum in Boston. It's going to be called Holocaust Museum Boston, and its primary mission is going to be to educate about hatred, and they're going to have schools come and people come and from all over the world, and they're going to host events, and their entire mission is going to be education. And education is so important because and it is scary. It is scary to think that there are politicians out there that are voicing their dislike, or I want to say hatred, but dislike for the Jewish people. The Jewish people have from time immemorial been scapegoats. Everybody has, over the years, we've been scapegoats. And there's been anti-Semitism is nothing new. And my father would say that too. He would say it's nothing new, but he would say he always wanted to have a museum. He wasn't content to just stop with the memorial. The memorial was something that was so important to him, but education was so important to him. And he said, education is what people need. Education is what will get people to understand what hatred can do.
But, no, go on, please.
That's what his whole mission was. That's why he went and spoke and lectured and met with people, and always would tell his eyewitness testimony. And he would say to me and to Michael and to Joseph, you must bear witness. When I'm no longer here, you have to bear witness. This is your obligation. As a child of a survivor, as a grandchild of a survivor, you have to bear witness and tell the world what happened during the Holocaust. Because while it was, a little over 70 years ago, some people have forgotten about it. Some people don't even know about the Holocaust. And so, there are many schools and towns and cities where people don't even know what the Holocaust is. And so it's not that remote in history. So this is why I think education is so important, and I know my father would agree with that.
It is, but in Europe for many years, for decades now, it's not unusual in France, Belgium, Holland to see armed guards, visible guards, policemen with machine guns guarding synagogues and other Jewish buildings, shall we say. And I don't know if we're going to approach that soon, if we're going to get to that point soon here in America. I know that it's getting to the point where now Jewish community centers are being guarded by not blatant guards like that. They, shall we say, undercover guards who are carrying weapons. But you mentioned the new Holocaust Museum, and I know you were there, you spoke.
Yes, sir.
Now, what happened there was something very unique in that it wasn't publicized. It wasn't publicized, and the extended Jewish community didn't know about it. And this was because of the fear, I think, of anti-Semitism, of people converging on that, nefarious characters, to do whatever they would do. And it's a well-founded fear, because this is the new era that we live in. It's sad, but I think that it's a new reality. Just on a side note, for example, my daughter, she's in Italy now. And I told her, I said, she wears a Magen David, Star of David, like you do. And I said, leave it at home. Don't identify yourself. Don't be like a billboard advertising that you're Jewish. You're going to Italy, which is okay. but still, you're going to Europe, you're not in America or Israel anymore. And I said, just be careful out there. Again, this is to the point where you have to be leery, shall we say, about appearing to be Jewish in the outer world. Now, again, like your father, I'm very optimistic about America. I can't picture that being the case here. But maybe I'm naive. And I think that if he were here, he would be more of a realist and to bring me back to reality and maybe to bring us back to reality because he's seen it before. You know, prior to the Holocaust, there were the Cossacks. In Russia, there was the Inquisition, and we can go back to the Middle Ages, and it just goes back a long way. In every generation, as the Bible says, they come to destroy us. And this was obviously happening with what was occurring in Iran. I actually wrote a column about that about a month ago, talking about how Israel has saved the Jewish people from a second Holocaust. Yes, the Holocaust was horrible, but the worst Holocaust could befall the Jewish people would have been the annihilation of the Jewish state, 7 million, up to 10 million Jews. That's not going to happen because of what Israel and the U.S. have done. But again, it's the same mindset, the destruction of the Jewish people, which Hitler began, which they want to continue from Iran. And this is the problem. This is why Iran had to be dealt with harshly, and they have been. And hopefully they won't be able to raise their head again. But you know, who will be next? What nation will be next? What entity will be next?
It's
That's
not
the
just
problem.
Iran. There's a whole
Certainly.
group of countries and religions that just want the destruction of the state of Israel and want death to all Jews. Death to Israel and death to America is what that's their ideology. And that is very scary. That is
Exactly.
very
And
scary.
It's interesting how in America they're largely supported, and you see people using the term genocide and throwing it around, that Israel is committing genocide.
Yes, which is a
and-
lie.
Which is obviously a blatant lie, but it's almost ridiculous to me to see that when people the government of those countries are preaching the ideology of death to America, death to Jews. You heard Hamas say these things, and people expect Israel to not respond, to have. I'm very humanitarian, but there's things that need to be done at times, and it's very sad to see this in our country.
You know, surveys have indicated that the American people are very pro-Israel, but the younger people are not. And this is disturbing. And you're obviously the future. You're able to, through your own life's experience, to tell people what happened and to really carry on the legacy of your grandfather, the great Steve Ross. And I will never get tired of saying that. This is the fastest 30 minutes in talk cable talk news, and we're very glad that you came.
Thank
We're
you
very
for
glad
having
to have
us.
you here. It's been a while,
It's a pleasure.
and you both look wonderful. You've carried on the legacy of your father and your grandfather, whom we all love dearly, and who was very, very much loved by the community and the greater Boston community as well. So we thank you for being here. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
sir.
Thank you so much for having us. It's a pleasure and an honor.
Jason, let's go see your room.